speaking of a little bit of diplomacy and a whole lot of poking, maybe we can get to China and this larger multipolar world shift that's happening. I want to pull up something that I know we're all biggest fans of Annalena Baerbock here, but she was recently on Fox News, and I'm going to play what she had to say. She was live on Fox News where she did what she did and calls Xi Jinping a dictator. I'm going to play in a second, but I think I'd like to hear about your impressions on how the collective West is treating China. It's very similar in a sense. While there isn't an open conflict like Ukraine, we have Mark Milley saying, well, we can't have an armed conflict with China. They just reversed course on the spy balloon saga, which I think is huge and not getting a lot of attention, but a huge shift. But then again, at the same time, at any given moment, every time there are like a warming up, Jake Sullivan just met with Wang Yi, but it seems like each time there's something that happens that kind of brings relations back into a very poor place. So let's listen to what Annalena Baerbock has to get your reaction, because I think it fits quite well with how the collective West as a whole has been treating China at the same time that it is in open warfare with Russia.
With liberty and peace in Ukraine. And we will support Ukraine as long as it takes. Because if Putin were to win this war, what sign would that be for other dictators in the world, like Xi, like the Chinese president? So therefore, Ukraine has to win this war. Freedom and democracy have to win. And we will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes.
So, pretty standard fare, but I think the big deal here is calling Xi Jinping a dictator. The German envoy was summoned by China directly after these remarks, called provocative by Mao Ning. But at the same time, I think this gets to a larger problem that the collective West has been fueling with China, and it's very related to what's going on with Russia. So whoever wants to comment first or react first.
Alexander, you want to take this?
Okay, well, I mean,
Annalena 560.
Yes, I mean, it is Annalena, of course, and of course she's. I mean, the idea of Annalena Baerbock as a German foreign minister, as a diplomat, is astonishing. And once upon a time, any foreign minister of Germany who said something like that, I mean, would have been sacked the following, and within an hour. I mean, it tells you something about the political situation in Germany today, that such a person who is so obviously unqualified to be foreign minister manages to remain foreign minister and is able to come out on television. And of course, this has been shown in Germany as well, and talk in this kind of fashion. So, I mean, it does tell you this, but it also tells you, for me, that all of these attempts, and we've seen many of them, there's been this procession of diplomats, or rather officials in the United States going to Beijing. We've had Blinken, we've had Yellen, we've had Raimondo. We've now had this very interesting meeting between Wang Yi and Sullivan in Malta, which for various reasons, I think the Chinese were led to think that it was intended to be private. We've had this, but which the Americans again spoke about. We've had these comments from Milley about the balloon. The Chinese were right all along. Basically, that's what he's saying. But viscerally, they can't really change their feelings. I mean, we have Annalena saying that, Baerbock saying that Xi Jinping is a dictator. But of course, Biden himself has said the same thing. It's no different, because this is how these people really feel about China and about China's leader. And nothing that they will say in face-to-face contacts with the Chinese changes that. And the Chinese, who are, far from being unintelligent people, have long since figured this out. And of course, Wang Yi goes from Malta, he flies to Moscow. He has a meeting there with Lavrov. We can talk about that. But if you read the Chinese readout of the meeting with Lavrov, a lot of it to me looked like a response to the things that he'd been discussing with Sullivan. He was clearly angry with Sullivan. It wasn't obviously a meeting that went well. So the administration wants, at one and the same time, to give the impression that relations with China are getting better, even whilst viscerally it's clear that they are, deeply antagonistic to China and fundamentally don't accept the legitimacy of the Chinese government, because when you call the leader of a government, the leader of that country, a dictator, you are questioning the legitimacy of the government ultimately. And at the same time, they continue to harass China in every way that they possibly can. They continue with technology restrictions. They're really spooked by the Huawei chip, and they're starting investigations about that. And they're diverting funding from Egypt to Taiwan, military funding now, doing all of these things. So the Chinese see what is going on, and they're able to see perfectly clearly that, what the Americans say in private doesn't match what the Americans actually do, and that there is no incentive, therefore, for China to play along with this fiction that relations are getting better when the reality is that they're getting worse.
Yeah, Alex.
Annalena, she was clearly reading a script. I mean,
yeah,
she had rehearsed lines and she was just repeating those lines. There's no doubt about that. You could see that she was struggling to get through the
demeanor. It was very
yeah. Maybe she needs some help from Zelensky. Maybe he can teach her how to properly read a script. But she has no idea what she's saying and what she's doing. That's for sure. But Olaf Scholz, when they asked him about this incident, he didn't apologize. He didn't say my foreign minister misspoke or anything like that. He pretty much backed up Annalena's statement. He said China is a communist country, Germany's a great democracy. So, obviously there's a dictator in China. That was pretty much what Olaf Scholz said. I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what he said, or at least his office, his spokesman. That was the message that he gave when they were asked to comment on what Annalena said. Look, even if there's an Afghanistan-like collapse with Ukraine, even if we get that, the U.S., I feel the U.S. will find a way to get through it all. They'll find a way. They're far away. They'll figure it out. Europe, the EU, is getting pummeled, and it's going to get pummeled. And the real story, the really big story out of this entire tragedy, and that's what this is, entire tragedy. The real big story for Europe is the deindustrialization of Germany. The way Germany has completely destroyed itself, willingly destroyed itself. And for what? For what? For Zelensky? Really? You've destroyed what took you decades and decades to build. And not only did you destroy your relationship with Russia, because according to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, Zelensky blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That's what they want us to believe. But now Germany has to destroy its relationship with China. Ursula's waging war on China's auto industry. Annalena is calling Xi a dictator. Scholz is calling China a bad communist government. The central bank of Germany, I was reading today in the Financial Times, Central Bank of Germany told businesses, stop doing business with China, move away from China, don't be dependent on China. What they are doing to Germany and what Germany's leaders are doing to Germany is the big story for Europe. That's the big story. This is the separation, because as Germany goes, so does Europe go. So the minute Germany destroys connections with Russia, destroys its business with China, all of Europe is is going that way. And you know where Europe's going to have to go? It has no other options. It's going to have to do whatever the US tells it to do, because no one likes the EU officials. No one wants to do business with the EU officials. You're looking at 80% of the world. The jungle is going to be separated from the garden. And the garden is the collective West. It's Europe, but Europe is going to be 100% dependent on the United States. 100% dependent, because it's burning all of its bridges with everybody else, with Africa, with China, with Russia. It's burning all of those bridges voluntarily at the orders of the Biden White House. That's the part that is so amazing. Blinken and Nuland and Biden, they're the ones that are telling Germany to do this, and Germany is doing it. I mean, it's incredible. But that is the big story here, and we talked about it way in the beginning of this whole conflict. Alexander, in a video, said what we're going to be seeing here is the deindustrialization of Germany. You know what? It's gone way past the deindustrialization. This is worse than deindustrialization, what they're doing to Germany. We've moved past just the deindustrialization. But, Annalena and Schultz and Habeck, they continue to just push forward.
Yeah, and it seems as the United States is playing a very two-timing kind of position on China. On the one hand, it's engaging in this faux diplomacy. Alexander, hearing what you said about Wang Yi and Lavrov's meeting, the results of it after Sullivan and Wang Yi met, I mean, that kind of says it all about what has been going on. But at the same time, every time this happens, it also feels like Europe is then compelled to play almost like attack dog and be even fiercer than the United States. And I think this has been a pattern with Ukraine as well. And all what that has led to, I think, is an acceleration of this multipolar world. I mean, the G20 summit, right? This announcement of this corridor, and now there's some pact. I think the Financial Times, the Atlantic Cooperation Pact, and there's the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Like these alternatives to what Russia and China are doing, but at the same time, by severing Europe from Russia and from China, the United States, in effect, accelerates that process, while destroying Europe in a sense, economically and politically, because politics are certainly very unstable as well. But Alexander, if you wanted to.
Well, Danny, can I just say about these infrastructure projects? I've been hearing about infrastructure projects coming out of the West for about 30 years, and they never materialize. I mean, I remember once upon a time, I was writing and reading all kinds of pieces about something that was going to be called the Nabucco pipeline. I'm sure Alex remembers it. The Nabucco pipeline, named after a Verdi opera that was going to provide natural gas from the Caspian Sea to Europe. Remember that? Nobody does. It will disappear. It will melt away. All of these projects will melt away. Chinese projects are different. Russian projects are different. Remember the Paris-Siberia pipeline that was never going to be built? That was what they said. I remember it. I was there. I was actually in St. Petersburg when it was announced that they were going to build this pipeline. I was reading all the media in the West saying, this is never going to happen. It doesn't make any economic or financial sense. The logistics are too complicated. The distances are too great. It was built. So that's the difference. The Chinese, the one thing they are good at is infrastructure. You go to China, infrastructure there is superb. They have the money and the reserves and the savings to finance building this infrastructure. As a very good friend of mine said to me not very long ago, I live in one part of the United States. I want to travel to another, going by train. It's an absolute nightmare. How is a country like that, with that kind of problems, with its own infrastructure, going to establish vast corridors and things of that nature? Once upon a time, the United States that built the Panama Canal could have done it. Today's United States cannot. So all of this is complete fiction. It's not going to happen. It's rhetoric that we hear. You know, G20 summit ago, I seem to remember, was it a G7 summit? They were going to put together a vast fund to compete with China's Belt and Roads. Whatever happened? Again, it's all melted away. So nobody should be impressed by these things. They're constantly churning out alternatives, but nobody, I think, outside the small group of people in the West who come up with these projects takes them especially seriously. There is now a railway link joining up Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. That is real. And that's going to develop, and it's going to enhance increasingly. Everything else, all of the things that you hear about from the West are simply fantasies. If I can just come back to the Wang Yi Sullivan meeting, there's a very interesting fact. If you go to the Chinese Foreign Ministry's website, they rushed out very quickly a readout of Wang Yi's meeting with Lavrov. Now, that happened after the meeting with Sullivan. So the Chinese Foreign Ministry, at least for the time being, at least when I last checked, was holding back on publishing a readout for the meeting with Sullivan in Malta, which is, for me, a very clear sign that they were not happy with the way that meeting went and probably hadn't intended that it should be publicized at all. So, you know, we'll wait and see whether they do actually provide a readout. And if they do, I suspect it's going to be very, very carefully checked and edited, and they'll be very careful in what they say in it. And it'll be an interesting readout to read. And of course, if no readout appears at all, that will be interesting also.
Yeah. Alex, anything to add?
You know, in Cyprus, they've been talking about this whole gas pipeline now for 20 years. 20 years. We discovered gas like 20 years ago. And, you know, it was in 5 years, you know, Cyprus is going to be the richest island. Because we got gas, it's going to happen. We're going to take our gas, we're going to move it to Europe. It's going to displace Russia. We're now 20 years into this thing. And they need Russia. They need Russia to come here to tell them, to teach them, to show them how it's done.
Yeah. They
need Russia. Just like they need China to build it. Because Europe, the EU, it can't do it.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHyphoong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.